Vivid verses.
The mahogany sideboard in the dining room had always been a symbol of our shared stability, a heavy, dependable piece of furniture that anchored the room. I was running my hand along its polished surface when I noticed the laptop. It was open, the screen glowing softly in the twilight of the late afternoon. I hadn't intended to prying. I simply needed the previous year's property tax assessment for a scheduled consultation with our wealth manager. It was a procedural necessity, the kind of logistical chore that kept the machinery of a high-net-worth life humming. I expected the task to take 90 seconds. I navigated to a directory titled Renovation Blueprints. It was a plausible hiding place, given Carrie's recent obsession with updating the guest wing. But as I clicked through, I found a spreadsheet that had nothing to do with floor plans or upholstery swatches. It was a document mapping out a total asset extraction and legal decoupling, targeted for completion by the third quarter of 2024. My fingers remained steady on the glass trackpad. My pulse didn't quicken. Instead, a profound, icy clarity settled over me. I began to read. My wife was the primary strategist. Her mother, Olivia, was noted as the financial auditor. Her brother, Thane, was designated for security and logistics. This wasn't a sudden whim of an unhappy spouse. It was a paramilitary operation conducted within the walls of my own home. The plan was segmented into distinct movements. The first involved psychological distancing, the deliberate establishment of a narrative centered on my supposed emotional neglect. Carrie's was instructed to archive every minor disagreement, every time I chose work over a social engagement, every instance where my natural composure could be framed as analytical coldness. It was the last 10 weeks. The next movement involved a staged confrontation. She was to trigger a separation dialogue while her family was present to act as concerned observers. They would frame her exit as a necessary escape from my controlling nature. Then came the extraction itself. She intended to file the legal petition while I was on my semi-annual site audit in Singapore, thousands of miles away and unable to respond in real time. The final step was the rekeying of the residence and the total cessation of direct contact, funneling all communication through aggressive legal counsel. I scrolled through the granular subpoints. One cell, highlighted in a soft amber, caught my eye. Maintain a veneer of domestic harmony. Avoid escalating. Use the I feel silence script. Log his reactions, specifically if he attempts to solve the problem logically. I sat back, the blue light of the screen reflecting my eyes. I wasn't angry. Anger is a luxury for those who can afford to lose control of the narrative. I felt a detached, intellectual curiosity. I had spent years providing a life of absolute security, and in return, I was being treated as an adversary to be outmaneuvered. Her cousin, Vance, was cited in the footnotes. He had apparently navigated a similar extraction years ago. It seemed the family had a playbook. There were nested tabs for financial tracking. Carrie's had been auditing me for 7 months with the precision of a forensic accountant. Every client dinner, every piece of specialized hardware for my firm, every withdrawal over a certain threshold. It was all there, flagged with notes like unnecessary professional indulgence. I saw a line item for a high-end ergonomic chair I'd bought for my home office. She had logged it as an excessive luxury acquisition without spousal consent. The irony was palpable. I spent 14 hours a day in that chair, generating the very capital she was currently plotting to bifurcate. Another tab projected her post-divorce lifestyle. She had extrapolated a settlement that included our lake house, her SUV paid in full, and 60% of my diversified portfolio. Most striking was a standard of living adjustment totaling $55,000 for her stifled career growth. Stifled. Carrie's worked as an interior designer perhaps 4 days a month, and only when the project interested her. I had never once placed a barrier in the way of her professional ambitions. If anything, I had offered to fund her own studio multiple times. She had declined, preferring the leisure my labor afforded her. Now, that leisure was being weaponized as a sacrifice. I returned to the primary document. A section titled Anticipated Counterarguments read like a manual for a high-stakes negotiation. If I offered to reduce my work hours, she was to pivot to the too little, too late defense. If I suggested therapy, she was to claim she felt unsafe sharing in front of a mediator I might intellectualize. At the bottom of the final page, a note from 6 weeks ago confirmed my suspicions. Consulted with Sterling. He confirms his firm can handle the aggressive posture. Initial deposit moved from the rainy day fund. Olivia replaced the balance the following morning. They had retained an attorney while I was taking her to the coast for her birthday. While we were toasted to our 10-year plan, she was already paying a man to dismantle it. The file had been created 5 months ago. It had been saved 4 hours ago. For nearly half a year, I had been living in a curated simulation. My phone vibrated on the sideboard. A message from Carrie's, grabbing Mediterranean at that spot near the gallery. Don't worry about the kitchen tonight. See you at 7. I looked at the screen, then back at the garden through the window. Our engagement photo sat on the console. We were in the Highlands, the wind whipping her hair, her eyes bright with what I had assumed was love. I didn't feel the urge to break the frame or weep. I simply studied it, curious about the exact moment the woman in the photo had transitioned into the strategist in the spreadsheet. I closed the laptop, ensuring the lid was at the exact angle I'd found it. I was a man who valued order, and Carrie's had just introduced a chaotic variable. It was time to restore the balance. The following morning, I was in a glass-walled office downtown, sitting across from Julian Thorne. He was a man of 60 with a reputation for being the final word in high-net-worth protection. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like a sovereign. I slid the printed copy of the plan across his desk. Julian read it in a silence, so profound you could hear the hum of the building's ventilation. When he finished, he removed his glasses and looked at me. She's quite thorough. Most people lead with emotion. Your wife leads with logistics. She made a tactical error, I said, my voice calm. She assumed that because I am analytical, I would be a predictable variable in her equation. She didn't account for the possibility that I might see the equation before it was finished. Thorne leaned back, his fingers steepled. This document is evidence of bad faith negotiation and premeditated fraud regarding the behavioral concerns she intends to manufacture. If her attorney, Sterling, sees this, he'll realize he's being asked to facilitate a scripted perjury. He's aggressive, but he's not stupid. I want my perimeter secured, I said. I have no interest in a scorched earth policy, but I will not be extracted. We move today, Thorne said. First, the liquidity. We don't drain the joint accounts. That's a rookie mistake that looks like financial abuse in court. We draw exactly 50%, move it to an escrow account labeled for interim living expenses, and document it. We change the beneficiaries on your trusts and insurance immediately. Regarding the house, her plan explicitly mentions changing locks and restricting access. That gives us the grounds for a preemptive filing for exclusive possession based on the documented threat of an illegal lockout. He looked at me, his eyes searching for a crack in my composure. How are you holding up, Cyprian? This is a significant betrayal. I view it as a failed merger, I replied. The emotional component is a sunk cost. My priority now is the integrity of the remaining structure. Thorne smiled, a thin, sharp expression. I like your frame. Most men in your position are looking for someone to blame or someone to help them beg. You're just looking for the exit door. I'm looking for the truth, I said. She wanted a separation. I'm going to ensure she gets exactly what she asked for, just not on the terms she scripted. The week that followed was a masterpiece of controlled observation. I returned home and played the role she had assigned me, the analytical, slightly distant, but reliable husband. I watched her with a new clinical clarity. I love you, she whispered before bed, was now a data point. Every time she sighed and said she felt unheard, I recognized it as a line from page 4 of her script. It was a strange sensation, living in a house where every interaction was a performance. I watched her check her phone under the table, knowing she was likely messaging Olivia or Thane. I watched her take notes in her journal, which I now knew was a log of my emotional withdrawal. I didn't feel the urge to confront her. I felt the focus of a professional managing a high-stakes transition. Thursday evening, she took a call on the terrace, her voice hushed. When she came back in, she looked at me with a practiced mask of concern. Thane's having some trouble with his property taxes. I'm going to run over there for a while to help him look at some files. You don't mind, do you? Not at all, I said, not looking up from my book. Logistics are important. She was gone for 4 hours. I knew she wasn't looking at tax files. She was at Olivia's, rehearsing the Saturday confrontation. They were likely sitting around Olivia's kitchen table, refining the dialogue, ensuring Thane knew when to step in if I became difficult. While she was gone, I finished the digital audit Thorne had requested. I photographed the contents of our safe. I moved my personal archives to a secure cloud server. I felt no guilt. I was simply responding to the environment she had created. Friday night, Carrie's was a hive of displaced energy. She was cleaning the baseboards, rearranging the library, her movements jerky and anxious. Everything all right? I asked. Fine, she snapped, then immediately softened her tone. Just a bit restless. I think I need the house to feel perfect for tomorrow. Olivia and Thane are coming over for coffee, remember? I remember, I said. It's marked on my calendar. Saturday morning arrived with a crisp, indifferent sunlight. Carrie's made a full breakfast. Omelets, artisan toast, fresh pressed juice. It was a last meal of sorts, though she didn't know I knew. What are your plans for the day? She asked, her eyes tracking my face for any sign of suspicion. I have some reports to finalize for the Singapore trip, I said. I'll be in the study. Oh, don't bury yourself in work all day. The game is on later. Let's just have a relaxed evening when the family gets here. I'll be out by 5:30, I promised. The afternoon passed in a blur of silent preparation. At 5:15, I went into the living room and set up a small, discreet camera near the bookshelf. Not for voyeurism, but for legal documentation. I opened my tablet and initiated a secure link with Julian Thorne. At 5:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. Olivia and Thane entered, their faces fixed in expressions of performative gravity. They sat in the living room, forming a semicircle around me. Carrie sat between them, the victim flanked by her logistical support. At 5:58 p.m., Carrie's picked up the remote and muted the television. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with the scent of Olivia's perfume and the weight of the lie they were about to tell. Cyprian, Carrie's began, her voice a perfect tremolo of feigned hesitation. While everyone is here, I think we need to have a very serious talk about us. About where we are. I sat in my wingback chair, my hands resting lightly on the armrests. I didn't lean forward. I didn't tense my jaw. I'm listening, I said. She launched into the script. She spoke about the emotional desert of our marriage. She spoke about how my analytical nature made her feel like a line item rather than a wife. She spoke about the financial opacity that left her feeling disempowered. Olivia nodded like a metronome. Her eyes narrowed at me. Thane sat with his arms crossed, looking at me with a staged, protective anger. "I think," Carrie said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "that we need to consider a separation. A real one. And I think, given the behavioral patterns we've discussed, it would be best if you stayed at the club for a few months while I figure out my next steps." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. The room was silent, waiting for my reaction. They expected me to argue. They expected me to be cold and defensive, providing them with the erratic response Carrie's needed for her log. "Carrie's," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "When did you first consult Sterling? Was it before or after you moved the money from the rainy day fund?" The shift in the room was instantaneous. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the space. Carrie's didn't just go pale. She went vacant. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. What are you talking about?" she stammered. "Your attorney," I said. "Sterling. You paid the retainer nearly 2 months ago. Olivia, I believe you reimbursed her the next morning." Thane stood up, his face reddening. "Look, Cyprian, if she's unhappy, you can't just interrogate her." "Sit down, Thane," I said. I didn't raise my voice, but the sheer weight of my composure forced him back into his seat. I pulled my tablet from the side table and turned it around. It displayed the digital audit. "I believe we're currently at the trigger separation dialogue phase. You're exactly 3 minutes behind the timeline you saved at 2 p.m. on Tuesday." Olivia stood up now, her voice shrill. "This is an invasion of privacy. You had no right to go through her files." "I was looking for our tax records on our shared device," I said. "What I found was a roadmap for the fraudulent extraction of my assets." "Carrie's, you were very thorough." The section on my anticipated counter-arguments was particularly enlightening. I tapped the screen, opening the Zoom link. Julian Thorne appeared, his face impassive. "Good evening," he said. "I am Julian Thorne. I have been observing this interaction at my client's request. Carrie's, for the record, my client discovered your plan 21 days ago. We have already filed for exclusive possession of the residence and a protective order for all separate property. Your attorney, Mr. Sterling, was served with the evidence of your premeditated strategy this afternoon." Carrie's looked at me, and for the first time in 10 years, I saw her without the mask. She looked small. She looked caught. "You knew this whole time? You let me keep going. I wanted to see if you would actually do it," I said. "I wanted to see if the person I had spent a decade protecting was actually capable of this level of calculation. You didn't disappoint." I stood up. "Thane, Olivia, the door is behind you. Carrie's, you have 20 minutes to pack a suitcase. Julian has already arranged for a courier to move the rest of your belongings to Olivia's house on Monday morning. You can't just throw her out of her own home." Olivia screamed. "I'm not throwing her out," I said calmly. "I'm simply enforcing the separation she requested. Given the behavioral concerns she's documented, I'm sure she'll feel much safer at your house, Olivia." Carrie stood up, her hands shaking. I did love you, Cyprian." "No," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "You love the security. You love the lifestyle. But people who love each other don't write scripts for their spouse's destruction." She left 20 minutes later, carrying a single suitcase and a shattered narrative. I watched her car pull out of the driveway from the living room window. The house was finally quiet, not the quiet of a curated simulation, but the quiet of an empty, honest space. 6 months later, the divorce was final. It was the fastest Thorne had ever seen a high-net-worth settlement reach a conclusion. Once Sterling saw the roadmap document, he advised Carrie's to settle immediately. She took her car, her personal effects, and the 50% of the joint savings I had already carved out for her. There was no lake house. There was no career sacrifice payment. There was only the truth. I ran into her once at a small bistro near the park. She was alone, looking older, the vibrancy that had once defined her muted by the reality of her new circumstances. She saw me and stayed for a moment, her hand hovering over her bag. "I've been in therapy," she said, her voice lacking its old practiced lilt. "I'm trying to understand why I felt I had to do it that way. I was afraid of being left with nothing." "You were never going to be left with nothing," I said. "I had a 10-year plan that involved us retiring to the coast. You were the one who changed the objective to extraction." She looked down at her coffee. "I should have just talked to you. I see that now. My mother, she pushed the logistics. She said, 'Men like you only understand strength.'" "Strength is honesty," I said. "What you did was just a failed calculation." I walked away without looking back. I had a dinner date with a woman who worked as a research scientist, someone who valued data, yes, but who valued the truth even more. I drove back to my house, my home. I had repainted the dining room. I had replaced the mahogany sideboard with a piece that was lighter, more modern. I sat on my sofa and looked at the space. It wasn't a project anymore. It wasn't a phase. It was just my life. And as I had learned, the best defense against a curated lie is simply the willingness to see it for exactly what it is. I checked my phone. A message from the scientist, running 5 minutes late. "Just finishing a lab report. See you soon." "Take your time," I replied. "I'm exactly where I need to be."
Thanks for listening.